a terrified 8-year-old girl clutching a jar of pennies, a towering Hell's Angel with a facial scar and a leather cut, stranded at a diner register. When she paid for his black coffee with her very last dollar, she didn't just buy a drink, she bought a merciless army. The rain was coming down in sheets across the cracked asphalt of Route 66, drumming a relentless, aggressive beat against the neon sign of Rusty's Diner. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old grease, stale tobacco, and burnt coffee. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of grey, miserable day that seeped into your bones and stayed there. Sitting at the counter, a mountain of a man named Silas Grinder Montgomery stared into the bottom of an empty porcelain mug. Grinder was a full-patch member of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. At 6'4", with a sprawling web of tattoos crawling up his neck and a jagged scar cutting through his thick beard, he looked exactly like the kind of man you crossed the street to avoid. His heavy leather cut bore the iconic death head patch on the back, a symbol of a brotherhood forged in gasoline and blood. But today, Grinder wasn't looking for trouble. He was drowning in grief. He had just spent 3 days riding back from a memorial run for a club brother in Oakland, a man he had known for 20 years. Grinder was exhausted, running on fumes and desperate for caffeine. In the corner booth, largely ignored by the morning regulars, sat an 8-year-old girl named Chloe. She was small for her age, wearing a faded pink windbreaker that was 2 sizes too big and soaked at the cuffs from the rain. Her sneakers were worn completely through at the toes. Spread out on the table in front of her wasn't a hearty breakfast, but a battered math workbook and a small, empty plastic cup. Grinder cleared his throat, a sound like a diesel engine turning over. "Brenda," he rumbled, his voice gravelly and low. "Refill. And let me get the check." Brenda, a waitress who had been working at Rusty's since the 90s, poured the dark liquid into his mug and slid a faded green receipt across the counter. "That's $3, Grinder, but the storm knocked out the phone lines. Card reader is down. Cash only this morning." Grinder grunted, reaching a massive, calloused hand into the front pocket of his heavy denim jeans. He pulled out a worn leather wallet attached to a thick silver chain. He flipped it open. Empty. He checked his other pockets. Nothing. He remembered with a flash of irritation that he had emptied his cash roll at the toll booth 2 states back, expecting to hit an ATM in town. The only other cash he had was a crisp $100 bill tucked into the stash tube on his Harley-Davidson Road Glide, parked out in the torrential downpour. "You got change for 100? Grinder asked, his jaw tightening. Brenda shook her head sympathetically. "Just emptied the till for the bread delivery, honey. You're going to have to go to the gas station across the highway and break it." Grinder sighed, a flare of genuine annoyance washing over him. The thought of walking out into the freezing rain just to break a bill for a $3 coffee felt like the final insult in a miserable week. He gripped the edge of the counter, preparing to stand up, when a tiny, quiet voice broke the tension. "Excuse me." Grinder looked down. Standing beside his heavy motorcycle boots was Chloe. She barely came up to his waist. In her small, trembling hands, she held a plastic Ziploc bag filled with quarters, dimes, and a heavy pile of pennies. "I can pay for his coffee," Chloe said, looking up at Brenda, though her eyes nervously darted to the terrifying biker beside her. Grinder frowned, his thick eyebrows pulling together. "Listen, kid, keep your money. I can go break a bill." Chloe stood her ground, though her hands were shaking. She unzipped the bag and began carefully counting out the coins onto the counter. My mom says you should always help people who look like they're having the worst day of their life. You look really sad, mister." The diner went dead silent. The few patrons holding their forks stopped eating. No one told Grinder he looked sad. People told him he looked dangerous, intimidating, or terrifying. But this scruffy, malnourished little girl saw right through the leather, the patches, and the scars, straight to the exhaustion and heartbreak underneath. "Kid, seriously," Grinder started, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "It's $3, Chloe insisted, sliding the meticulously counted pile of metal across the laminate counter to Brenda. "There." Grinder stared at the coins. Some of the pennies were green with age. He looked back at Chloe. He noticed the frayed edges of her sleeves, the hollow look in her cheeks, and the fact that she hadn't ordered a single piece of food for herself. She had just given a complete stranger her absolute last dollar. "What's your name, little girl?" Grinder asked, kneeling down so he was eye level with her. "Chloe," she whispered, taking a half step back. "I'm Silas. But my friends call me Grinder," he said, extending a hand the size of a catcher's mitt. Chloe hesitated, then reached out and shook his index finger. "You just bought me a coffee, Chloe. That makes us friends. And in my world, a debt is a debt. I owe you one." Chloe managed a small, fragile smile. "You don't owe me anything. Have a good day, Mr. Grinder." With that, she grabbed her math book, pulled the oversized hood over her head, and pushed through the glass doors out into the freezing rain. Grinder stood up, his coffee forgotten. He watched her tiny silhouette disappear down the flooded sidewalk. The hardened biker felt a tight knot form in his chest. He turned to Brenda, his eyes narrowing. "Brenda, who is that kid? And why the hell is she walking in the rain with holes in her shoes?" Brenda let out a heavy sigh, wiping the counter with a rag. "That's Chloe Bennett. Sweetest little thing in the county, but she's had it rough. Her father took off before she could talk. Her mother, Abigail, used to clean houses around here. Good woman, but Abigail got sick a few months back. Real sick. Something with her lungs. She hasn't been able to work, and the medical bills wiped them out. They live over at the Oakwood Arms." Grinder's jaw clenched. The Oakwood Arms wasn't just a low-income housing complex. It was a decaying, rat-infested concrete block on the worst side of town. It was a haven for drifters, petty thieves, and violent junkies. It was no place for an 80-year-old girl. "Who runs that building?" Grinder asked, his tone shifting from curious to dead serious. "Richard Sterling." Brenda spat the name like poison. "He's a slumlord. He's been trying to push the low-income tenants out so he can sell the land to commercial developers. I heard he cut the heat off in Abigail's unit last week to try and force them to leave. The woman is breathing through an oxygen machine, Grinder, and he cut their heat." Grinder didn't say another word. He dropped his $100 bill on the counter. "Keep the change, Brenda." He strode out of the diner, the rain immediately plastering his hair to his forehead. He swung his massive frame over his Harley, the engine roaring to life with a deafening, thunderous boom that rattled the diner's windows. He didn't ride toward the highway to head home. He pointed his front tire toward the Oakwood Arms. The debt had just been called in. The apartment complex was exactly as grim as its reputation suggested. Broken glass littered the parking lot, and the stench of urine and damp garbage hung heavy in the damp air. Grinder parked his bike right in front of the main entrance, leaving it entirely blocking the walkway. Nobody in their right mind would dare touch a Hell's Angels motorcycle. He walked into the dim, flickering light of the lobby. He checked the rusted mailboxes until he found a scrap of tape reading A. Bennett, Apartment 4. He climbed the concrete stairs, his heavy boots echoing ominously in the stairwell. As he approached the 4th floor, he heard the sharp, aggressive sound of a man shouting, "I don't give a damn about your machine, Abigail. Rent was due on the 1st. It is the 12th. Grinder moved silently down the hallway, pressing his massive frame against the peeling wallpaper near the open door of apartment 4B. He peered inside. The apartment was freezing, the walls bare. On a stained mattress in the corner lay Abigail, a frail, pale woman hooked up to a noisy, struggling oxygen concentrator. Standing over her was a man in a sharp, expensive grey suit, Richard Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, please," Abigail gasped, her voice weak and rattling. "I just need until Friday. The disability check is coming. Chloe is out trying to find—" "Chloe is a brat who should be in foster care," Sterling snapped, kicking a nearby chair. But then his tone changed. It dropped lower, losing its frantic anger and adopting a cold, sinister edge. "Let's stop playing games, Abby. This isn't about the rent, and you know it. You shouldn't have been snooping in the basement last week." Grinder's eyes narrowed in the hallway. He held his breath, listening intently. "I didn't see anything," Abigail cried, panic rising in her chest. "I swear, I was just looking for the breaker box because you shut our power off." "You saw the crates," Sterling hissed, leaning in close to her face. "You saw the product. My associates don't like witnesses, Abigail. The only reason you aren't at the bottom of the river right now is because a dead mother brings cops, and cops bring warrants. So here is the deal. You take your brat, you pack your bags, and you leave this city tonight. If you are here tomorrow morning, I am going to let my associates come up here and deal with you, and they won't be gentle with little Chloe." In the hallway, a cold, calculated fury washed over Grinder. This wasn't just a greedy slumlord. Sterling was moving illicit cargo, likely narcotics or stolen weapons, through the basement of the apartment building, using the destitute tenants as a human shield against police raids. And now he was threatening the life of the little girl who had just bought him a cup of coffee. Sterling turned and stormed out of the apartment. He brushed right past the shadows of the hallway, completely failing to notice the towering Hell's Angel, standing perfectly still in the dark recess near the stairwell. Grinder watched Sterling walk down the stairs, pulling out a cell phone and dialing a number. "Yeah, it's me." Sterling's voice echoed up the stairwell. "The woman is dealt with. Move the rest of the shipment tonight. We're clearing the building." Grinder stepped out into the faint light of the hallway. He looked at the open door of 4B, hearing Abigail's muffled, terrified sobbing from inside. He could have walked in there, offered her the $100 and walked away. But $100 wouldn't stop a criminal syndicate. $100 wouldn't keep Chloe safe from the men Sterling was bringing to the building tonight. Grinder pulled his heavy leather jacket tight. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a encrypted burner phone. He didn't call the police. He knew the law moved too slow, and often, in neighborhoods like this, the law didn't care at all. He dialed a single number. It rang twice. "Yeah?" a gruff voice answered. "Dutch," Grinder said, speaking to the president of his Hell's Angels charter. "It's Grinder. I'm at the Oakwood Arms on the south side." "You need a pickup, brother?" Dutch asked. "No," Grinder replied, his eyes fixed on the empty stairwell, a dangerous, wolfish grin spreading across his scarred face. "I need you to sound the horn. Call the boys. All of them. Tell them to drop what they're doing and get their boots on the street. We're going to war for a little girl." Within 45 minutes of Silas Grinder Montgomery's call, the bleak, rain-soaked streets surrounding the Oakwood Arms began to vibrate. It started as a low, distant hum, a vibration that rattled the loose window panes of the decaying apartment complex. Then it escalated into a deafening, unified roar. Down the flooded avenue, a column of 30 Harley-Davidson motorcycles cut through the torrential downpour. Their headlights pierced the gloom like a mechanized cavalry. Leading the pack was Dutch, the grizzled president of the charter, riding a customized street glide. Behind him rode men with names like Whiskey, Iron, and Bear, hardened veterans of the asphalt, bound by a strict code of brotherhood. They pulled into the cracked parking lot of the Oakwood Arms, entirely blocking the exits, the entrances, and the street itself. The synchronized rumble of their engines was a declaration of war, echoing off the concrete walls before they all killed the ignitions in unison. The sudden silence was heavier than the noise. Upstairs, in apartment 4B, Abigail gasped, pulling Chloe close to her chest on the stained mattress. The little girl trembled, staring at the locked door. The heavy sound of leather boots marching up the concrete stairwell echoed through the building. The footsteps didn't stop until they reached their door. 3 heavy, deliberate knocks shook the cheap wood. Chloe swallowed hard, slowly standing up. She crept toward the door, her heart hammering in her ears. She reached up, turning the deadbolt, and pulled the door open just a crack. Standing in the hallway was the towering figure of Grinder. Behind him stood 2 more men, just as intimidating, carrying heavy cardboard boxes. "Mr. Grinder?" Chloe whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Hey, kid," Grinder said, his gravelly voice remarkably gentle. He pushed the door open, stepping inside. "Brought some friends, and some supplies." Grinder nodded to the men behind him. Whiskey, a biker with a thick grey beard and a scar over his left eye, set down a box overflowing with fresh groceries, bottled water, and a portable propane heater. Bear, a man as wide as a doorway, gently placed a stack of thick, warm blankets on the floor. Abigail stared from her oxygen machine, absolute terror mixing with profound confusion. Who are you? What do you want from us?" Grinder walked over to the mattress and knelt down, taking his leather gloves off. "Ma'am, my name is Silas. A few hours ago, your daughter gave me the last dollar to her name when she thought I was down on my luck. In my club, we don't ignore a debt of honor. I know about Richard Sterling. I know what he threatened to do to you and Chloe tonight." Abigail broke down into heavy, ragged sobs. "He's going to kill us. He's bringing men. Terrible men. You can't stop them. They're a syndicate." "Ma'am," Grinder said, his voice dropping to a low, chilling timbre that carried absolute certainty. "They aren't dealing with a frightened mother anymore. They're dealing with the Hell's Angels. You two stay in this room, lock the door, and do not come out until I tell you it's safe. We are taking the watch." Down in the lobby, Dutch had already orchestrated the defense. He was a master tactician who had survived 3 decades in the criminal underworld. "Whiskey, take 4 men and secure the roof," Dutch commanded, his voice echoing in the damp foyer. "Bear, you're on the stairwells. Nobody gets past the 2nd floor. Grinder, you and me are going to take a look in this basement." Grinder descended the stairs into the pitch-black belly of the building, a heavy flashlight in one hand and a tire iron in the other. He and Dutch kicked the padlock off the heavy steel door of the boiler room. Inside, hidden behind stacks of rotting drywall, were wooden shipping crates. Dutch pried one open with a crowbar. Grinder shined his flashlight inside. It was packed to the brim with shrink-wrapped bricks of fentanyl and crates of unregistered military-grade assault rifles. "Sterling isn't just a slum lord," Dutch muttered, spitting on the concrete floor. "He's a staging area for the iron cartel out of the valley. These guys play for keeps, Grinder." "So do we, brother," Grinder replied, his eyes cold and hard. "Sterling told his guys to clear the building tonight. They'll be here soon to move this cargo. What's the play?" Dutch pulled a secure burner phone from his leather cut. A wicked, calculating smile spread across his face. "We don't need to fire a single shot to destroy these bastards. We just need to hold the line until the cavalry arrives. and I know exactly who to call to make sure Sterling never sees the light of day again. Midnight arrived with a suffocating darkness. The rain had slowed to a heavy drizzle, but a thick fog had rolled in off the river, wrapping the Oakwood Arms in an eerie, impenetrable grey shroud. 4 unmarked black SUVs rolled to a silent halt at the edge of the property. The doors opened, and 15 men stepped out into the damp night. They were heavily armed, dressed in tactical black, moving with the quiet precision of professional mercenaries. Leading them was Elias, a cold-blooded enforcer for the cartel, flanked by a nervous, sweating Richard Sterling. "The power is out in the whole block," Sterling whispered, wiping his forehead with a silk handkerchief. "Just get the cargo out of the basement. If the woman and the kid are still upstairs, make it look like a break-in gone wrong." Elias ignored him, signaling his men to fan out and advance toward the main entrance. They expected an empty, terrifyingly quiet building. They expected an easy job. They walked through the shattered glass doors of the lobby, their assault rifles raised, sweeping the darkness. "Secure the perimeter," Elias hissed into his radio. "Move to the basement stairs." Suddenly, a blinding, chaotic flood of light erupted from the darkness. 30 high-beam motorcycle headlights flicked on simultaneously from deep within the lobby and the surrounding hallways. The cartel enforcers instinctively shielded their eyes, temporarily blinded by the staggering wall of halogen light. Then came the sound. It wasn't gunfire. It was the simultaneous, deafening rack of 30 pump-action shotguns echoing in the enclosed concrete space. "I wouldn't take another step, gentlemen," a deep voice boomed over the mechanical clicks. As the mercenaries' eyes adjusted, the terrifying reality of their situation came into focus. Standing in a semicircle, completely blocking the entrance to the basement and the stairwell, were the Hell's Angels. They stood shoulder to shoulder, impassive, their leather cuts gleaming in the headlights. In the center of the formation stood Dutch, holding a 12-gauge rested casually over his shoulder. Next to him was Grinder, his jaw set in stone, his eyes locked dead onto Richard Sterling. Sterling let out a high-pitched gasp, stumbling backward. Who the hell are you?" "We're the new building management," Grinder growled, stepping forward into the light. Elias raised his weapon, his finger hovering over the trigger. His men followed suit. "You bikers are out of your depth," Elias said, his voice dripping with venom. "You have 10 seconds to get out of our way, or we paint this lobby with your brains." Dutch laughed, a dark, humorless sound. "Elias, isn't it? You're a smart guy. Look around. We have the high ground, we have the numbers, and we have cover. You pull that trigger, maybe you take down a few of us, but every single one of you dies in this lobby. Is Richard Sterling's payday worth dying for on a Tuesday night?" Elias hesitated. He looked at the bikers, recognizing the absolute absence of fear in their eyes. They weren't backing down. They were waiting for an excuse. "That's not even the best part," Grinder added, tapping his watch. "You see, we knew we couldn't just kill you. You'd just send more guys tomorrow. So, Dutch here made a phone call, an anonymous tip to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the ATF, and the local news networks. We sent them high-resolution photos of the fentanyl and the machine guns in the basement 10 minutes ago." Sterling's face drained of all color. "You're lying!" "Listen," Dutch whispered, holding up a finger. Through the fog, breaking through the sound of the rain, came the wail of sirens. Not just one or two. It sounded like the entire city's police force was descending on the block. The flashing red and blue lights began to pierce through the heavy mist outside the glass doors. "Feds!" Elias spat, his eyes wide with sudden panic. He turned to his men. "Fall back! Get to the vehicles!" "Too late for that, boys," Dutch smiled. The SWAT trucks came crashing through the chain-link fences, surrounding the SUVs before the mercenaries could even reach for the door handles. Spotlights cut through the fog, illuminating the building. Heavily armored tactical teams swarmed the exits. Sterling turned to run, to slip out the back alley, but a massive hand clamped onto the collar of his expensive suit. Grinder lifted the slumlord completely off his feet and slammed him against the concrete wall, knocking the wind out of his lungs. "You're not going anywhere, Sterling," Grinder whispered fiercely into the man's ear. "You're going to federal prison, and if you ever even think the name Chloe while you're sitting in your cell, I will make sure my brothers on the inside pay you a visit. Do we understand each other?" Sterling, weeping and gasping for air, nodded frantically. Grinder dropped him to the floor, just as the FBI tactical units stormed the lobby. The feds found the cartel men in the lobby, arms raised, surrendering without a fight. They found Sterling cowering in the corner. But when the lead agent turned to question the heavily tattooed bikers who had blocked the stairwell, they found the lobby empty. The Hells Angels had slipped out through the loading dock, their engines already fading into the stormy night. They vanished like ghosts, leaving the criminals entirely to the law. The next morning, the sun finally broke through the clouds over the city. Chloe stood by the window of apartment 4B, looking down at the street below. The police had cleared out the basement, and Sterling was all over the morning news, facing life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Suddenly, a familiar rumble echoed in the parking lot. Chloe's face lit up. She ran to the door, throwing it open, and sprinted down the stairs. Standing by his motorcycle was Grinder. He wasn't wearing his threatening scowl today. He was holding a large manila envelope. Chloe ran up to him, wrapping her tiny arms around his massive leg. Grinder chuckled, gently patting her head. Abigail slowly made her way out of the building, leaning heavily on a cane, her oxygen tank strapped to her side. "Silas, I don't even know how to begin to thank you. The police told us Sterling is gone for good. But we still have nowhere to go. And my medical bills..." Grinder walked over and handed Abigail the thick envelope. "Open it." Abigail's hands shook as she tore the seal. Inside was a stack of cashier's checks totaling over $50,000, a deed to a small, single-story house in the suburbs, and a receipt from the city's top pulmonologist, paid in full. "What is this?" Abigail gasped, tears streaming down her face. "The club threw a little fundraiser last night," Grinder said casually, though the emotion in his throat was thick. "We called in a few favors from charters across the coast. The house is yours. The medical care is paid for. You and Chloe are under the permanent protection of the Hells Angels. Nobody will ever touch you again." Chloe looked up at Grinder, her eyes shining with absolute awe. "You really did all this for $3? Grinder knelt down, pulling a shiny ancient penny from his vest pocket, one of the exact coins she had given him at the diner. He pressed it gently into her palm. "No, Chloe." Grinder smiled softly, the jagged scar on his face stretching with genuine warmth. "I did this because, in a world full of darkness, you chose to be the light. You saved my life that morning in the diner. Now, I'm just returning the favor." As Abigail wept with joy, Grinder stood up, swung a leg over his Harley, and fired up the engine. He gave Chloe a 2-finger salute before tearing off down the road, leaving behind a family that would never have to live in fear again. The debt was paid, but the bond forged over a cup of coffee would last a lifetime. From a terrifying slumlord's threat to the earth-shaking roar of the Hells Angels taking over the block, this story proves that the smallest act of kindness can summon the most powerful protection. Chloe's $3 bought her family a miracle. If you were moved by Silas and Chloe's incredible bond, please hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more unbelievable true stories.